The orchestra was playing something classical and unobtrusive, a delicate melody meant to be the auditory equivalent of champagne effervescent, expensive, and easily ignored. From my perch near the floor to ceiling windows of our Pacific Heights mansion, I surveyed the scene, my scene, with a satisfaction so deep it was almost a physical sensation, like the smooth, cool weight of the crystal glass in my hand. Below, the lights of San Francisco glittered like a carpet of fallen stars, a kingdom I had fought tooth and nail to conquer. Inside, my kingdom was just as dazzling. Every detail of the evening had been meticulously curated by me. The champagne was a vintage Krug. The canapés were crafted by a chef I'd poached from a Michelin-starred restaurant, and the guest list was a carefully cultivated ecosystem of the city's elite. There was Charles Allister, the venture capitalist whose portfolio could swallow small countries whole, locked in conversation with a stern-faced judge I needed in my corner for a zoning dispute. There was Veronica Sterling, a woman whose smile never reached her surgically enhanced eyes, dripping in diamonds and gossip, her presence a necessary evil. This wasn't a party. It was a battlefield disguised in silk and chandeliers, and I was its undisputed general. "Jocelyn, darling, another triumph." A voice purred beside me. It was Marcus Thorne, a rival developer whose flattery was as transparent as his hair plugs. I turned, offering him a smile that was all polished teeth and no warmth. "Marcus, so glad you could make it. I trust you're enjoying the view?" I gestured vaguely towards the city, but my meaning was clear. "Look at all this. Look at what I have built." He understood. "Always, Jocelyn. You have a Midas touch for property and for atmosphere." I gave a slight nod, a dismissal cloaked in civility, and my gaze swept the room again. My mind was a constant ledger of calculations. I noted who was speaking to whom, the subtle shifts in power dynamics, the faint whispers of deals being born and alliances being forged. Control. My father's voice, crisp and unyielding, as the starched collars he always wore, echoed in my memory. "Control is power, Jocelyn, and power is everything." He had hammered that lesson into me until it had become the very architecture of my soul. I had applied it to my studies, to my career, and to my life, with the ruthless efficiency of a surgeon. My dress, a column of emerald silk that had cost more than most people's cars, felt like armor. My heels, precariously high and sharp, were my weapons. I moved through the crowd with practiced grace, a word here, a laugh there. My attention, a commodity I bestowed with strategic precision. I was Jocelyn Vance, the titan of Bay Area real estate, a woman who didn't just break glass ceilings, but pulverized them into dust and built penthouses on top. And then I saw him, my husband Miles. He wasn't schmoozing. He wasn't networking. He was standing near the grand marble island in the kitchen, his back partially to the crowd, refilling a platter of artisanal cheeses. He was wearing the linen shirt I despised, the one that was just a little too soft, a little too rumpled, a little too him. His shoulders, usually so relaxed, seemed hunched under the invisible weight of the room's opulence. He carefully arranged a slice of Humboldt fog next to a wedge of aged cheddar, his movements gentle and deliberate, the movements of an artist, which he once was. Before me, before the children. Before his life had become the quiet, unassuming scaffolding that supported my glittering empire. Something inside me, something cold and sharp, snapped. It was a feeling I knew well, a familiar surge of irritation mixed with a faint, bitter taste of shame. In this room of predators and power players, he was a stark, gentle anomaly. He was the soft underbelly of my carefully constructed image. He didn't belong. He was a walking, breathing reminder of a life I had left behind, a life of quiet weekends and paint-splattered jeans. He was my one vulnerability, the one variable I could never fully control. Tonight, in front of Charles Allister, whose billion-dollar portfolio I was trying to entice, that vulnerability felt like a glaring flaw. It felt like weakness, my weakness. The orchestra paused between pieces, creating a momentary lull in the room's chatter. It was an opportunity, a stage, and with the cold, calculated instinct of a predator, I seized it. I raised my voice, pitching it to carry across the polished Italian marble floors. I infused it with a light, teasing mockery, a tone that invited everyone to share in the private joke. "Oh, look, everyone." Heads turned. The quiet hum of conversation dipped. Miles looked up, his brow furrowed in confusion, a piece of manchego still in his hand. His eyes, the color of warm whiskey, found mine across the room. I smiled, a wide, brilliant, and utterly cruel smile. Isn't my husband just the perfect little housewife? The silence broke, shattered by a wave of laughter. It started as a titter, then swelled into a full-blown roar. I saw Charles Allister chuckle, a deep rumbling sound that was music to my ears. I saw Veronica Sterling cover her mouth with a manicured hand, her eyes dancing with malicious glee. They were laughing with me. They were on my side. The feeling was intoxicating, a heady rush of power that drowned out the small, quiet voice of conscience. I saw Miles's face. The confusion had vanished, replaced by a slow, creeping flush of crimson that stained his neck and cheeks. His smile, the one he had been wearing a moment before, faltered and died. His eyes, those warm, kind eyes, clouded over with a hurt so profound it was almost shocking. But I was too high on the room's adulation to care. I was in control. Veronica, ever the opportunist, slithered closer to me. "Tell us, Miles," she called out, her voice dripping with venomous sweetness. "Do you wear a frilly apron when you vacuum?" More laughter, harsher this time. Miles's knuckles, I noticed, had turned white where he gripped the edge of the silver platter. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, a statue in the center of their ridicule, his gaze still locked on me. He was pleading with me, I realized. Pleading with me to make it stop. But stopping would be a sign of weakness. Stopping would be ceding control. Charles Allister, wiping a tear of mirth from his eye, added his own jab. "I bet he makes a mean pot roast. A man of many hidden talents, eh, Jocelyn?" He clapped me on the shoulder, the ultimate sign of acceptance into his boys' club. This was it. This was the moment I had been working towards. I was one of them. I should have stopped it there. I should have defended him. I should have walked over, taken his hand, and told them all to go to hell. He was the father of my children, Stella and Asher. He was the man who had set aside his own dreams so that I could chase mine. He was the quiet anchor in the relentless storm of my ambition. He deserved my loyalty. He deserved my protection. I gave him neither. Instead, I went for the kill. The taste of power was too sweet, the approval of these people too vital. I leaned forward as if sharing a delicious secret. "Oh, he does more than that," I said, my voice low and conspiratorial. "You should see him with a feather duster. It's like watching Baryshnikov dance." The room howled. It was a raw, primal sound of a pack turning on the weak. I had thrown him to the wolves, and in doing so, I had secured my position as the alpha. I felt a dizzying sense of triumph. I had taken the one thing that could be perceived as my weakness and turned it into the punchline of a joke, proving that nothing, not even my own husband, was off limits in my pursuit of dominance. But then, through the haze of my victory, I saw his eyes again. The hurt was gone. The pleading was gone. In their place was something I had never seen before, a chilling, desolate cold. An anger so pure and quiet it was more terrifying than any shout. It was the look of something beautiful, irrevocably breaking. The connection that had once bound us, the invisible thread of love and respect, had been stretched thin for years. In that moment, with one final brutal tug, I had snapped it completely. He set the platter down on the marble island. He didn't drop it or slam it, but the sound it made, a sharp, resonant clang, cut through the laughter with the finality of a guillotine. The room fell silent. Instantly, he straightened up to his full height, and for the first time, he didn't look like an artist or a stay-at-home dad. He looked like a stranger, a man I didn't know at all. His voice, when he spoke, was low and steady, yet it carried an immense weight that commanded the attention of every person in the room. He wasn't looking at the crowd. He was looking only at me. "You know what, Jocelyn?" he said, his words precise and devastatingly calm. "You can serve your own damn cheese." And with that, he turned and walked away, not just away from the kitchen island, but through the parted sea of our stunned guests. He walked past Charles Allister's shocked expression and Veronica Sterling's gaping mouth. He walked with a purpose and a dignity that I had just tried so desperately to strip from him. He walked straight to the grand, oversized mahogany door at the front of our home. He didn't look back. The door opened, letting in a rush of cold night air that seemed to extinguish the party's warmth. Then he was gone. The sound of the door slamming shut echoed through the cavernous space. It was a sound of absolute finality, a period at the end of a sentence I never thought would end. As the heavy silence pressed in on me, the intoxicating high of my power play evaporated, leaving behind a nauseating dread. The laughter had died on everyone's lips, replaced by awkward, pitying stares. They weren't looking at me like a general anymore. They were looking at me like a monster. The judgment in their eyes was a palpable thing, a suffocating blanket of shame. A chill, deep and profound, ran down my spine, a cold that had nothing to do with the open door. The glitter of the city lights outside the window suddenly seemed distant and mocking. My perfectly curated world, my kingdom of control, felt fragile, like a house of cards poised to collapse. The orchestra, after a moment of stunned hesitation, began to play again. But the melody was different now. It was no longer background noise. It was a funeral dirge. What had I done? The silence that followed the final guest's departure was a living entity. It was heavier than the thickest velvet, colder than the marble under my bare feet. The remnants of the party, a forgotten champagne flute here, a crumpled napkin there, were artifacts from a civilization that had abruptly ceased to exist. The orchestra was long gone. The caterers had packed up and vanished with ghost-like efficiency. All that remained was me, the smell of wilting flowers, and the deafening echo of a slammed door. I walked through the cavernous rooms of my own home, as if I were a trespasser. Each step was a conscious effort. The emerald silk of my dress felt less like armor now and more like a shroud. I finally stopped in front of the grand gilt-edged mirror in the foyer, the same one I'd checked my reflection in countless times tonight, ensuring every hair was in place, my smile perfectly calibrated. The woman staring back at me now was a stranger. Her makeup was a flawless mask, but her eyes were wide with a stark, animal terror. The terror of a queen who has just watched her throne crumble to dust beneath her. The question from hours before returned, no longer a whisper, but a roar that filled the suffocating silence. What have I done? But that wasn't the right question. The right question was, how did I get here? Catastrophes like this don't just happen. They are built, piece by painful piece, over years of neglect and denial. The scene at the party wasn't the earthquake. It was merely the final, violent tremor that brought the whole rotten structure down. The cracks in the foundation had been there for years, spreading silently beneath the polished floors of my perfect life. My father's face materialized in the mirror's reflection, superimposed over my own, Richard Vance, a man who measured love and achievements and affection in perfectly aligned margins. I could almost hear his voice, as crisp and unforgiving as a winter morning. Look at this lawn, Jocelyn. See the lines? Perfect. Parallel. Every blade of grass in its place. That is control. Without it, you have chaos, weeds, anarchy. I was 8 years old, standing beside him on the immaculate green carpet of our suburban kingdom. I hadn't understood the words anarchy or chaos, but I understood the look in his eyes as he surveyed a neighbor's slightly overgrown yard, a look of profound disappointment, bordering on disgust. I learned early that the world, in my father's eyes, was divided into two categories, things that were under control and things that were failures. There was no in-between. His mantra, control is power, and power is everything, became my gospel. I applied it to everything. I organized my toys by size and color. I scheduled my study time in 15-minute increments. I saw friendships as alliances and dating as a series of strategic negotiations. I was building my life according to his blueprint, earning his rare, thin-lipped smiles of approval with every academic award, every debate trophy, every victory. I was becoming the perfect daughter, efficient, ambitious, and utterly devoid of messy, unpredictable emotions. And then I met Miles. He was chaos. He was glorious, beautiful, vibrant chaos. We met in a dingy shared studio space in the Mission District, a place that smelled of turpentine and potential. I was there on a misguided mission to invest in up-and-coming local artists, a calculated move to diversify my portfolio. He was there, covered in splatters of cadmium yellow and cerulean blue, wrestling with a canvas 3 times his size. He wasn't like the men I knew, the ones in bespoke suits who talked about stock options and leveraged buyouts. Miles talked about light. He talked about the way the fog draped itself over the Golden Gate Bridge like a lover's sigh, the exact shade of orange in a poppy at dusk. He saw the world not as a series of assets to be managed, but as a symphony of color and emotion to be captured. He looked at me, in my severe business suit and my tightly controlled bun, and he didn't see a predator. He saw a subject. "You're like a skyscraper," he told me on our first date, his whiskey-colored eyes twinkling with an amusement I found both infuriating and intoxicating. All sharp angles and gleaming glass. "But I bet the view from the top is incredible." He wasn't intimidated by my drive. He was fascinated by it. He called my ambition a force of nature and loved watching me work my magic, as he put it. With him, I felt a permission to exist that my father had never granted me. He wasn't measuring my worth. He was simply enjoying me. His love was not a reward for performance. It was a given. It was a warm, steady flame in the cold, sterile boardroom of my life. For a while, our two worlds coexisted. My days were a whirlwind of contracts and closings. His were a slow dance of brushstrokes and inspiration. I would come home, my mind buzzing with figures and projections, and he would ground me, pulling me into his messy, colorful world, making me forget the relentless calculus of my own. We were a study in contrast, the architect and the artist, and somehow it worked. When Stella was born, followed by Asher 2 years later, the delicate balance shifted. My career was on a vertical trajectory. I had just launched my own firm, Vance Properties, and the pressure was immense. The stakes were higher than ever. Miles, whose gallery shows were gaining traction but not yet providing a steady income, made the offer. "Let me stay home, Joss," he'd said one evening, bouncing a colicky baby Stella on his hip. "You're on fire right now. Don't slow down. I've got this. We've got this." It seemed so logical, so practical. It was the most efficient allocation of our resources. That's how I framed it in my mind, a business decision. I told myself it was for the family. My success would be our success. His sacrifice was an investment in our shared future. I conveniently ignored the flicker of sadness in his eyes as he packed away his canvases to make room for a crib, telling myself it was temporary. But it wasn't. Temporary became the new permanent. The corporate ladder I was climbing had no top, and my hunger for the next rung was insatiable. I was closing multi-million-dollar deals while Miles was dealing with scraped knees and parent-teacher conferences. I was flying to Hong Kong for a conference while he was teaching Asher how to ride a bike. I told myself I was the provider, the protector. I was building the fortress that kept our family safe. I never stopped to realize I was building it around myself, locking them out and me in. The first major crack appeared on the day of Stella's fourth-grade dance recital. I remember the day with a sickening clarity. I was in the final stages of a brutal negotiation for a landmark downtown property. The deal was my masterpiece, the culmination of a year's work. The recital was at 4 p.m. The final meeting was at 3 p.m. I could do both, I told myself. I was a master of scheduling, of efficiency. But the meeting dragged on. The clients were posturing, nickel and diming over clauses. My phone buzzed in my purse, ignored. 3 became 4, then 4:30. When we finally shook hands, a triumphant grin plastered on my face. It was 5:15. I glanced at my phone. 7 missed calls from Miles. 1 text message. "She keeps looking for you in the audience." The guilt hit me like a physical blow, a punch to the gut that left me breathless. I pictured her, my beautiful, serious little girl, in her scratchy pink tutu, her face a mask of concentration, her eyes scanning the crowd for me, and finding an empty seat. I rushed out of the meeting, barking apologies and dialing Miles. "I'm so sorry," I gushed, the words tasting like ash. The meeting ran over. "How was she?" There was a pause on the other end of the line, a silence that stretched for an eternity. "She was great, Joss," he finally said, his voice flat, devoid of its usual warmth. "You should have seen her. I'll make it up to her," I promised, to him, to myself. "We'll do something special this weekend." But the weekend was consumed by paperwork from the new deal, and making it up to her became another item on a to-do list that was perpetually postponed. I buried the guilt under another layer of work, another closing, another success. Work was my anesthetic. As long as I was winning, I didn't have to feel the pain of what I was losing. The other memory, the one that truly laid bare the chasm between my world and theirs, was quieter, more insidious. It happened about a year before the party. I'd been on a particularly grueling project, working 80-hour weeks for a month straight. I felt a rare, sharp pang of remorse and decided to fix everything with a grand gesture. I'd seen it in a movie once. The career-obsessed mother reconnects with her family over a lovingly prepared home-cooked meal. It seemed foolproof. I left the office early at 6 instead of 9 and stopped at the fanciest organic market I could find. I wandered the aisles in a daze. I had no idea what my family even liked to eat anymore. Did Asher still hate mushrooms? Was Stella still a vegetarian? It was horrifying. I grabbed whatever looked expensive and healthy. Pre-cut organic vegetables, grass-fed steak, some fancy French cheese whose name I couldn't pronounce. By the time everyone got home, the kitchen was a war zone. Pots were boiling over, something was smoking in the oven, and I was frazzled, my silk blouse stained with tomato sauce. But I had managed to produce a meal. It looked nothing like the movie, but it was food. "Surprise!" I announced as they walked in, gesturing grandly to the table. "I made dinner." The looks on their faces were not what I had expected. There was no joy, no gratitude. There was only confusion. Stella and Asher exchanged a look I couldn't decipher. Asher, his voice small and hesitant, spoke first. "But it's Thursday." "Yes," I said, my smile feeling stiff. "And?" Miles sighed, a soft, weary sound. He put a gentle hand on Asher's shoulder. "It's pizza night, Joss," he said softly. "Every Thursday, we order from Tony's down the street. The kids look forward to it all week." Pizza night. It was such a small thing. A simple, weekly tradition. And I hadn't known. In that moment, I had never felt more like a stranger in my own home. The carefully constructed world I inhabited, with its high-stakes deals and lavish parties, suddenly felt like a pathetic, hollow sham. I didn't know about pizza night. Oh, was all I could manage. I didn't know. "There's a lot you don't know, Jocelyn," Miles said, his voice not accusatory, just tired, infinitely tired. We ate my fancy, unwanted meal in a strained, uncomfortable silence. The kids picked at the unfamiliar food before quickly excusing themselves. I was left alone at the table with Miles, surrounded by the ruins of my grand gesture. "I was just trying to do something nice," I said, my voice cracking. "I know," he'd replied, his eyes full of a sadness that seemed ancient. "But you can't fix years of absence with one meal, Joss. You can't just schedule connection into your calendar." His words should have been a wake-up call. They should have been the catalyst for real change. But I didn't know how to change. I only knew how to work, how to control, how to win. So the next day I threw myself back into my work with a renewed ferocity, as if closing one more deal could somehow fill the gaping hole in my life. I started throwing more parties, each one more extravagant than the last, filling our home with strangers to drown out the silence of my own family. It was a distraction. It was a defense. Standing now in the wreckage of that final, fateful party, these memories weren't excuses. They were exhibits in the prosecution's case against me. Each missed recital, each forgotten tradition, each moment I chose work over family was a crack in the foundation. I had ignored them, plastered them over with money and success, pretending the structure was sound. But a cracked foundation cannot bear the weight of a life. Tonight, it had finally, spectacularly, given way, and I was standing all alone in the rubble. The morning after was a study in gray. A thick, soulless fog had rolled in from the bay, pressing against the windows of the house and muffling the world in a blanket of damp silence. It was a perfect reflection of the atmosphere inside. The house, usually a testament to my success and power, now felt like a mausoleum, vast, cold, and echoing with the ghosts of yesterday. I hadn't slept. I had wandered from room to room through the night, a sentinel guarding an empty fortress. I'd ended up in the guest room, unable to face the king-size bed in our master suite, a space that suddenly felt obscenely large and cold. Every creak of the house, every distant city sound, was amplified in the oppressive quiet, each one a fresh torment. When dawn finally broke, painting the fog in shades of bruised purple and bleak silver, I forced myself to move. Routine, I thought. Routine would be my salvation. Control the small things. So I showered, the hot water doing nothing to warm the chill that had settled deep in my bones. I dressed in a severe charcoal pantsuit, the fabric of familiar, restrictive comfort. I applied my makeup with a steady hand, constructing the mask of Jocelyn Vance, the unflappable executive. But the mask felt flimsy today, like porcelain stretched thin over a screaming void. Downstairs, the house was unnervingly still. Miles's presence, which I had so often taken for granted, was now a palpable absence. There was no scent of the dark roast coffee he brewed every morning, no sound of the public radio station he always listened to, a low murmur of intelligent debate that had been the soundtrack to our family's mornings for over a decade. I found the children in the breakfast nook, already dressed for school. They sat on opposite sides of the polished mahogany table, two small, lonely islands. Stella, my fiercely intelligent 13-year-old, pushed a single piece of cereal around her bowl with the tip of her spoon, her gaze fixed on the swirling milk. Asher, my sensitive 10-year-old, was staring out at the fog, his shoulders slumped. The air between them was thick with unspoken words. "Good morning," I said, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet room. Neither of them looked up. Stella gave a small, almost imperceptible shrug. Asher remained motionless. The silence was a wall, and I had no idea how to breach it. "Where's Dad?" Stella asked, her voice flat. She didn't look at me. She addressed the question to her cereal bowl. My heart hammered against my ribs. Lie. The instinct was immediate, born of a lifetime of controlling the narrative. He had an early meeting. He wasn't feeling well. The excuses formed on my tongue, ready to be deployed. But as I looked at my daughter's rigid back, at the stubborn set of her jaw that was so much like my own, I knew a lie wouldn't work. Not this time. He had to leave early. I managed, the words feeling clumsy and inadequate. It was a half-truth, which felt even more cowardly than a full-blown lie. Asher finally turned from the window. His eyes, so like his father's, were wide and unnervingly perceptive. They seemed to see right through the carefully constructed facade I was wearing. He had always been the emotional barometer of our family, the one who could sense a storm long before the thunder rolled. "It's because of what you said, isn't it?" he asked. His voice wasn't accusatory. It was a simple, devastating statement of fact. At the party. My throat tightened, a knot of shame and panic. I couldn't speak. I could close $100 million deal without blinking, but I couldn't answer my own son's question. Stella's spoon clattered into her bowl. She finally looked up, her gaze meeting mine with a cold fire that startled me. "We heard you, Mom," she said, her voice dripping with a contempt that was terrifying coming from my own child. We both did. I flinched as if she had struck me. They had been upstairs, supposedly asleep. I had imagined them safe, oblivious, tucked away from the ugliness of my ambition. But of course they had heard. The sound of that laughter, that cruel, echoing roar, had probably seeped through the floorboards, poisoning the very air they breathed. "How could you?" Stella whispered. And in that whisper was the weight of 1,000 disappointments, 1,000 missed recitals and forgotten promises. It was the question of a child who had just watched her hero murder her other hero in cold blood. I had no answer. How could I explain it to them? How could I articulate the ugly, desperate need for approval that had driven me? How could I say that I had sacrificed their father, their kind, loving father, for a cheap laugh and the fleeting admiration of people I didn't even respect? The truth was too monstrous to speak aloud. The school run was conducted in a silence so complete I could hear the soft hum of the Range Rover's engine and the frantic thumping of my own heart. At the drop-off lane, they scrambled out of the car without a backward glance, without a goodbye or I love you, melting into the sea of other children, leaving me alone with my guilt. Work was no refuge. The office, normally my sanctuary of control and order, felt alien. My assistant, a hyper-efficient young woman named Chloe, greeted me with a cheerful, "Good morning, Miss Vance." But her eyes held a flicker of curiosity. The story of last night's implosion would already be spreading through the city's elite circles like wildfire. My humiliation would be Veronica Sterling's breakfast-time gossip. I sat at my vast, minimalist desk, overlooking the city that was supposed to be my kingdom, and I felt nothing but a hollow, aching dread. I stared at complex spreadsheets, but the numbers blurred into meaningless squiggles. I tried to return calls, but my voice felt weak and unconvincing. The power I had worked so hard to accumulate felt like a phantom limb. I knew it was supposed to be there, but I couldn't feel it anymore. My phone buzzed late in the afternoon. It was a text from Miles. My breath caught in my throat, For a wild, hopeful second, I thought it might be an olive branch. Asher has soccer practice at 5. Stella has her orthodontist apt at 4:30. I'll pick them both up. It was cold, practical, and utterly devastating. He was communicating with me like I was a nanny, a logistics coordinator for our children's lives. The we that had been the foundation of our family was gone. It was now I and you, two separate entities bound only by a shared calendar. The next few weeks were a special kind of hell. I lived in a house that was no longer a home. Miles would come and go, picking up the kids or dropping them off, his presence fleeting and spectral. We exchanged clipped, functional sentences in the foyer, never making eye contact, two ghosts haunting the same space. The children retreated further into their own worlds. Their bedroom doors were always closed when I was home. Music I didn't recognize leaked from under Stella's door, a thumping, angry beat that felt like a barricade. Asher spent hours building intricate Lego creations, his concentration absolute, shutting out the broken world around him. I tried to make amends. I started cutting my hours at work, delegating major tasks to my senior partners, an act that felt like tearing off a piece of my own skin. I forced myself to be home for dinner every night at 6 o'clock sharp, but the gestures felt hollow, performative. I would sit at the head of the long dining table, asking them about their day, my questions met with monosyllabic answers. The silence that answered me back was an accusation. It told me I was too little, too late. The damage was done. The breaking point, the moment the last sliver of my denial shattered, came on a Tuesday night about a month after the party. I walked into the master bedroom, and the sight that greeted me stopped my heart. Miles was there, and he was packing a suitcase. Not a small overnight bag, but a large, sturdy suitcase, laid open on the bed we had shared for 16 years. He was methodically folding his sweaters and placing them inside. "What are you doing?" The question was a strangled whisper. I knew the answer. I knew it with a certainty that was both terrifying and absolute, but I had to hear him say it. He didn't look up from his task. He smoothed a wrinkle from a gray cashmere sweater, his movements slow and deliberate. "I'm going to stay with my brother for a while, Jocelyn." "For a while?" I repeated, my voice trembling. To think. Is that it? You need some time to think?" I was babbling, clinging to the hope that this was just a temporary separation, a cooling off period. "Think about what?" I pressed, my voice rising with panic. He finally stopped folding and looked at me. His face was weary, etched with a sadness that seemed to have settled permanently into his features. The anger I had seen at the party was gone, replaced by a quiet, heartbreaking resignation. "About us," he said, the words falling like stones into the silence. "About whether there is an us anymore. About whether this marriage is still working." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. I stumbled back a step, clutching the doorframe for support. "No," I whispered. "Miles, please, don't. We can fix this. I can fix this. I'll do better, I promise. I'll change." He finally met my eyes directly, and what I saw there extinguished the last ember of hope. It was a mixture of sorrow and finality. "That's just it, Jocelyn," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "You've been promising to do better for years. Every time you missed a school play, every time you chose a conference call over a family dinner, you promised. But nothing ever changes. You're still the same controlling, work-obsessed woman I married. The only difference is, I don't think I can live with that woman anymore. I'm not sure I even know who she is." He zipped the suitcase. The sound was unnaturally loud, a final, definitive severing. He walked past me, not brushing against me, careful to maintain the distance that now defined us. I stood frozen, unable to move, unable to speak. As he walked out the door, suitcase in hand, my carefully constructed world didn't just crumble around me. It imploded, collapsing inward into a black hole of my own making. I had always prided myself on being in control, on having all the answers, on being the one who dictated the terms. But now, faced with the stark, undeniable reality of losing my family, I realized with brutal clarity how little control I actually had. I had controlled everything, except for the things that truly mattered. And now, they were gone. The weeks that followed Miles's departure bled into a single, monotonous gray. My life, once a meticulously scheduled symphony of power lunches and high-stakes negotiations, became a clumsy, disjointed rhythm of therapy sessions, tense family dinners, and long, sleepless nights. The fortress I had built for myself was no longer a symbol of strength. It was my prison. The silence within its walls was a constant, screaming reminder of my failure. I threw myself into the project of fixing my family with the same relentless energy I had once reserved for a corporate takeover. I read parenting books, hired the most sought-after family therapist in the city, and filled our calendar with forced fun activities. We went to museums the kids had no interest in and ate at restaurants that were too quiet, the clinking of our silverware the only sound punctuating the awkward silences. My attempts to reconnect were clumsy, like trying to perform delicate surgery with construction tools. I was trying to apply the principles of business to the fragile ecosystem of my family, identify the problem, strategize a solution, execute the plan, measure the results. But there was no metric for a child's trust, no KPI for a husband's broken heart. Every effort felt like a misstep. I'd try to talk to Asher about his day, and he would retreat into the world of his video games, the headphones a clear sign that I was not welcome. I'd suggest a shopping trip with Stella, and she would counter with a sarcastic, "What's the crisis? Trying to close a deal with me now?" Her words were sharp, honed by years of disappointment, and they found their mark every time. It was like trying to scale a sheer wall of glass with my bare hands. Every time I thought I was making progress, finding a small handhold, I'd say or do something that reminded them of the absent, self-absorbed mother I had been for so long, and I would slide right back down to the bottom. The moment of brutal, unsparing clarity, the moment that shattered my last illusion that this was something I could fix with strategic effort, came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I had, in a radical departure from my old life, left the office at 3 o'clock. No reason, no pressing family commitment, I just left. The act itself felt both terrifying and liberating. Chloe had stared at me as if I'd grown a second head. I came home to a house that was quiet and empty, the air thick with the smell of rain and loneliness. I was heading upstairs when I heard it, a small muffled sound from behind Stella's bedroom door. A sob. My heart constricted. My first instinct, the old Jocelyn's instinct, was to walk away, to respect her privacy, to avoid the messy, unpredictable world of a teenage girl's emotions. But the new Jocelyn, the desperate, fumbling Jocelyn, knew she couldn't. I knocked softly. "Stella? Honey, is everything okay?" The sobbing stopped abruptly. "I'm fine," came the choked reply. It was the universal teenage code for everything is wrong. Taking a breath, I pushed the door open. She was curled up on her bed, her back to me, her shoulders shaking. Her room, usually a chaotic explosion of clothes and books, felt still and somber in the gloomy afternoon light. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. I walked over and sat gingerly on the edge of her mattress. The space between us felt like a mile-wide canyon. She didn't answer for a long time. I could feel her wrestling with herself, the desire to be comforted warring with the instinct to keep me out. Finally, she rolled over. Her face was blotchy and tear-stained, her eyes red-rimmed and filled with a misery that made my own chest ache. "I got my period," she whispered, the words barely audible. For the first time, the world tilted on its axis. My daughter, my baby girl, had just crossed a fundamental threshold into womanhood. This was a milestone. This was a moment for mothers and daughters, a time for hugs and reassurance, for whispered secrets and shared wisdom. It was a moment that should have brought us closer together. And she had been in here, alone and scared, crying by herself. "Oh, sweetheart," I said, my voice thick with a sorrow so profound it felt like it was physically crushing my ribs. I moved to hug her, to wrap her in my arms and tell her everything was going to be okay. But she stiffened instantly. Her body went rigid in my arms, a small, sharp rejection that was more painful than any verbal barb she had ever thrown at me. It was an involuntary, instinctual recoil. I pulled back, my hands hovering uselessly in the air. "Why didn't you call me?" I asked, the question laced with a desperate, pathetic plea. "Why didn't you need me?" Stella pushed herself up, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. The vulnerability in her face was replaced by the familiar, hardened mask of teenage anger. Her red-rimmed eyes locked onto mine, and they were no longer the eyes of a child. They were the eyes of a judge delivering a verdict. "Why would I call you, Mom?" she asked, her voice raw. You're never here. And even when you are here, she took a shaky breath. Your mind is somewhere else. On your phone, on your laptop, on some deal. I didn't think you'd care. Her words were not knives. They were shards of glass. And they didn't just cut me. They embedded themselves in my heart. I didn't think you'd care. Of course I care, I choked out, the words feeling utterly hollow. Stella, you're my daughter. I love you more than anything in this world. She looked at me, a skeptical, knowing look that was far too old for her 13 years. And then she delivered the final, fatal blow. More than work? I opened my mouth to say it. Yes, of course. 1,000 times yes. It was the right answer. It was the only answer. But the words wouldn't come. They caught in my throat, strangled by the weight of 1,000 lies I had told myself for more than a decade. Because the truth, the ugly, unforgivable truth, was that she was right. For years, work had come first. Not just as a priority, but as the very center of my universe. My career, my success, my insatiable need for control. They had been the sun, and my family had been reduced to small, distant planets revolving in its orbit, their own needs and milestones significant only in how they reflected on me. To say yes would be the biggest lie of all, and in that moment of devastating clarity, I knew I couldn't lie to her anymore. The silence that hung between us was my confession. She saw it in my eyes. She saw the truth I couldn't speak. A single, fresh tear traced a path down her cheek. She didn't need me to say anything else. She swung her legs off the bed and walked out of the room, leaving me alone with the unbearable weight of my own damn answer. That night, I didn't even try to sleep. I went to my home office, the command center of my empire. Awards and accolades gleamed from the shelves, plaques congratulating me on being a woman of influence and a titan of industry. They seemed meaningless now, just pieces of metal and polished wood. They were monuments to a grand, empty life. My hand trembled as I picked up a framed photograph from my desk. It was an old one, taken on a family trip to Lake Tahoe years ago. We were all smiling, a genuine, unforced happiness radiating from the picture. Miles's arm was wrapped tightly around my waist, his head tilted towards mine. Stella, gap-toothed and beaming, was perched on his shoulders. A tiny Asher, his face smeared with chocolate ice cream, was grinning in my arms. We looked happy. We looked whole. We looked like a family. I stared at the woman in the photograph, the younger Jocelyn. Her smile was real. Her eyes weren't filled with the constant, anxious calculations of a CEO, but with a simple, uncomplicated joy. When had I lost her? When had I traded her in for this hollow, powerful imposter? When had I lost sight of what really mattered? The photograph slipped from my fingers, and the glass cracked against the edge of my desk, a sharp, splintering sound that mirrored the shattering of my own heart. I sank into my expensive leather chair, surrounded by the trappings of my success, and for the first time since Miles had walked out, I allowed myself to truly break. I put my head in my hands and wept. Not the quiet, controlled tears of a woman in charge, but the raw, racking sobs of a woman who had just realized she had systematically, deliberately, and unforgivably destroyed everything she had ever truly loved. The crack in the glass over the family photo was a small, jagged line, dividing the smiling woman I used to be from the family she had failed. I stared at it for hours as the night turned into a bruised, early dawn. The tears had finally stopped, leaving me empty, exhausted, and with a clarity I had never possessed before. The old Jocelyn, the one who thought she could strategize her way out of this mess, had died in Stella's room. Now I had to decide who would take her place. The next morning, I did something I had never done in my 20-year career. I called Chloe at 7 a.m. "I'm not coming in today," I said into the phone. My voice was hoarse but steady. Chloe's pause was audible. "Are you sick, Miss Vance? Should I clear your calendar for the morning?" "No, Chloe. I'm not sick. I'm just not coming in. Clear my calendar for the day." "But the quarterly review with the investors? The zoning hearing for the Geary project?" Her voice was rising in panic, the sound of my entire professional world teetering. "Reschedule the review. Send Marcus to the zoning hearing. He's ready." "Are you sure, Miss Vance?" "Yes, Chloe. I'm sure." And I hung up before she could ask more questions. I didn't have answers for her yet. I only knew that the machine had to stop. I spent the day in a strange, almost fugue state. I didn't open my laptop. I didn't check my email. Instead, I started cleaning. It wasn't a tidying up. It was a purge. I went into my walk-in closet, a shrine to my corporate armor. I pulled out the sharp, structured power suits, the towering stilettos that were weapons as much as footwear, the designer handbags that signaled my status. I boxed them up. Not all of them, but enough to create space, enough to breathe. Then, I did something even more radical. I put on a pair of soft, worn jeans I hadn't worn in years, and a simple white linen blouse. I looked in the mirror. Without the severe makeup, without the armor, I looked softer, more vulnerable, more human. I barely recognized myself, and for the first time in a long time, that felt like a good thing. When Miles arrived that evening to pick up the kids for his weekend with them, he stopped in the foyer, his eyes widening as he took me in. He was used to seeing me in my war paint, ready for battle or already victorious. "You look," he trailed off, searching for the right word, his gaze taking in the jeans, the lack of makeup, the quiet stillness in my posture. "Different?" I offered, a small, tentative smile touching my lips. "Yes," he said slowly. "Different." For a fleeting moment, I saw a flicker of the old warmth in his whiskey-colored eyes, a ghost of the man who had once loved the view from the top of my skyscraper. But it vanished as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by the guarded, wary look I had become accustomed to. The wall was still there. I hadn't expected it to fall just because I changed my clothes. As the kids piled into his modest sedan, Stella refusing to make eye contact, Asher giving me a hesitant, confused wave, I felt a pang of loneliness, so acute it was physical. This used to be my family, my life. Now, I was standing in the doorway, an outsider looking in on a unit that was functioning without me. That weekend, alone in the silent, cavernous house that felt too big for one person, I did the hardest work of my life. It wasn't analyzing contracts or negotiating deals. It was soul-searching. I sat in the quiet and forced myself to confront the truths I had spent years running from. I thought about my father. I thought about his mantra, control is power, and power is everything. I had achieved it. I had all the power. I had all the control. And what good was it? I was sitting alone in a multi-million-dollar mansion, while the people I loved were building a life somewhere else. Power, I realized, was a cold companion. It couldn't hug you. It couldn't forgive you. It couldn't love you back. I thought about the clients I had wined and dined, the deals I had closed, the accolades on my shelves. None of it, absolutely none of it mattered now. Not when compared to the look on Stella's face when she asked if I loved work more than her. The scales had fallen from my eyes, and I saw my life for what it was, a magnificent, glittering failure. But realizing the failure was only the first step. The real test was whether I had the courage to change it. And change wouldn't come from grand gestures or empty promises. It would come from surrender. The first act of surrender came in my therapist's office the following Tuesday. Dr. Evans, a woman with kind eyes and a terrifying ability to see through my defenses, had suggested it weeks ago. I had dismissed it as ludicrous. "I want to talk about the household finances," I said, sitting on the edge of her comfortable couch, Miles sitting on the far end, the demilitarized zone between us still intact. Miles looked wary. "What about them?" I took a deep breath. "I want you to take them over. The budget, the bills, the investments for the kids' college funds, all of it." The silence in the room was absolute. Miles stared at me, genuinely shocked. I had controlled the money from the day we combined our accounts. It was the ultimate lever of power in our relationship, the one area where my dominance was absolute and unquestioned. I had always insisted I knew best, that his artist brain couldn't handle the complexities of our portfolio. "You're serious?" he asked, searching my face for the trap. "I am," I said, my hands clasped tightly in my lap to stop them from shaking. "I've been holding on to it because it made me feel necessary, powerful. But it's also a way of controlling you. And I don't want to do that anymore. You're smart, Miles. You're capable. I trust you." The words "I trust you" felt foreign on my tongue, but saying them released a tension in my chest I hadn't even known was there. Miles didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Okay, I'll do it." In the weeks that followed, it was agonizing. I would find myself hovering when he was at the computer paying bills, biting my tongue until it bled to keep from offering suggestions or questioning his decisions. But Miles surprised me. He didn't manage things the way I did. He wasn't ruthless. He found deals I would have overlooked, cut unnecessary expenses I had considered essential, and adopted a more relaxed, less aggressive investment strategy. One evening, we were reviewing the monthly statement at the kitchen table, a neutral ground. "You're really good at this," I admitted, looking at the spreadsheet he had created. It was color-coded, clear, and surprisingly efficient. Miles looked up, a hint of a genuine smile playing on his lips. "You sound surprised?" I felt a blush, a rare occurrence, creep up my neck. "I guess I am. I always thought, well, I always assumed I was better with money because I made more of it." And he reached across the table. He didn't take my hand, but he placed his hand near mine, a gesture of proximity that felt like a lifeline. "You know, Joss, you don't have to be the best at everything. It's okay to let others take the lead sometimes. It doesn't make you weak." His words hit home with the force of a revelation. How much stress had I caused myself and everyone around me by needing to be the master of every domain? How many opportunities had I missed to see the strengths in others, especially him? Letting go of the finances was the crack in the dam. From there, I began to consciously, deliberately surrender control in other areas. At work, I stopped micromanaging. I gave my team autonomy, trusting them to handle tasks I would have once hoarded. To my shock, the firm didn't collapse. In fact, it flourished. My team, freed from my suffocating oversight, became more innovative, more engaged. I was less stressed. My decisions were sharper, and I was actually home for dinner every night. But the most profound change happened with the children. I stopped trying to direct their lives and started trying to witness them. One rainy Saturday, I found Asher at the kitchen table, his head in his hands, surrounded by crumbled papers and a math textbook that looked like it had been thrown across the room. "Hey," I said softly, walking in. "Everything okay?" "I hate math," he mumbled into his hands. "I can't do it. I'm stupid." The old Jocelyn would have sprung into action. "You're not stupid. Let's look at it. Apply the formula. Focus. You just need to try harder." I would have pushed, cajoled, and demanded success, believing I was helping him. The new Jocelyn took a breath. I pulled out a chair and sat down next to him. I didn't look at the book. I looked at my son. His small shoulders were hunched in defeat, his face pinched with anxiety. This wasn't about math. This was about fear. "Hey," I said again, gently touching his arm. He didn't pull away. "Let's close the book." He looked up, surprised. "But I have to finish." "It can wait. Come on. Let's go for a walk. Get some fresh air." We walked around the neighborhood in the drizzle, sharing an umbrella. I didn't bring up math. I let him lead the conversation. He talked about a new video game he was excited about a funny thing his friend said at lunch. Gradually, the tension left his shoulders. As we turned back towards the house, he spoke quietly. "Everyone else gets it so easily, Mom. I feel like I'm always behind." My heart ached. I had been so focused on pushing him to achieve, to be a winner like me, that I hadn't seen his pain. I had made him feel that his worth was tied to his performance. I stopped walking and knelt down on the wet sidewalk, ignoring the dampness seeping into my jeans so I could look him in the eye. "Asher, look at me. You are not stupid. Not even close. You are one of the smartest, most creative people I know." I took his small, cold hands in mine. "You know, when I was your age, I was terrible at science. I failed my first biology test." His eyes widened in disbelief. "You did? But you're so smart. You're the boss." I laughed, a genuine self-deprecating sound. "Being smart doesn't mean being good at everything, buddy. It means recognizing your strengths and not being afraid to ask for help with the things that are hard. I was afraid to ask for help. I don't want you to be." "Oh." We stood there in the rain, and for the first time, I felt a true connection with my son. Not one based on achievement or expectation, but on shared vulnerability. We spent the rest of the afternoon not doing math, but brainstorming. We talked about how his brain worked, how he liked to visualize things. We found some online games that taught math concepts through puzzles. By dinner time, the math wasn't done, but Asher was smiling. As he headed up to his room that night, he paused on the stairs and turned back to me. "Thanks, Mom," he said, "for listening." Those 2 words for listening meant more to me than any Deal of the Year award ever had. It was a small victory, a tiny green shoot pushing up through the scorched earth of my past mistakes. I was learning. It was a slow, painful, and humbling process. I was learning that true power wasn't about controlling the outcome. It was about showing up, being present, and having the courage to let go. I was learning that surrender wasn't defeat. It was the only way to win back the things that truly mattered. The seasons turned. The damp gray of winter bled into the tentative green of a San Francisco spring, and with it, a fragile, tender new life began to take root within the walls of our home. The change wasn't a sudden, dramatic transformation, but a slow, quiet evolution, like the turning of a great ship in a vast ocean. It happened in moments so small they were almost imperceptible, yet they were the bricks with which we were rebuilding our lives. It was the sound of laughter in the kitchen, a sound I hadn't realized I'd missed until it returned. Asher, now more confident, would try to explain the convoluted logic of his video games, and Miles would listen with genuine, fascinated attention. Stella, whose sarcasm had been her primary shield, began to lower it. She started sharing snippets of her day, complaining about a teacher or gushing about a new song, and she would look at me when she did it, a silent invitation into her world. The forced family fun nights were replaced by something organic and real. One Friday, exhausted from the week, I came home to find the living room transformed. Blankets and pillows were piled on the floor. A giant bowl of popcorn sat on the coffee table, and Asher and Stella were in a heated, good-natured debate over which movie to watch. "Mom, you're the tiebreaker," Asher yelled, seeing me in the doorway. "Star Wars or The Princess Bride?" Miles looked up from the couch, where he was untangling a string of fairy lights. He caught my eye and smiled, a real smile. It wasn't the guarded, weary expression of the past year. It was the smile I had fallen in love with, the one that reached his whiskey-colored eyes and made them crinkle at the corners. "Welcome home, Joss," he said. Those 3 words, spoken with such simple warmth, were everything. I wasn't an intruder anymore. I wasn't a visitor or a logistics coordinator. I was home. We started taking weekend trips, not the meticulously planned, overscheduled vacations of our past, but spontaneous adventures. We'd pile into the car on a Saturday morning with no destination in mind, just a direction. These trips led us to dusty antique shops in small coastal towns, to windswept beaches where we flew kites until our arms ached, to redwood forests where we'd walk in hushed reverence under the ancient giants. On one such trip, we ended up in a small, forgotten town on the coast. The sun was setting, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and violet. Asher and Stella were chasing the waves, their shrieks of laughter carried on the salty breeze. Miles and I sat on a piece of driftwood, watching them, the comfortable silence between us, a testament to how far we had come. "They're growing up so fast," I mused, my voice quiet. Miles nodded, his gaze on the kids. "They are." He paused, then turned to me. "But you know what? We're not missing it anymore." I leaned my head against his shoulder, a familiar gesture that felt brand new. He wrapped an arm around me, pulling me closer. It was an easy, natural movement, free from the hesitation and awkwardness that had defined our interactions for so long. "No," I agreed, my voice thick with emotion. "We're not." As I sat there, with the warmth of my husband beside me and the joyful sounds of my children filling the air, a profound sense of peace washed over me. This moment, imperfect, unplanned, sand in my shoes and salt in my hair, was worth more than any corner office, any prestigious award, any 9-figure deal. I thought back to my father's words, the ones that had been the operating system of my life for so long. Control is power. Power is everything. For so long, I had believed that if I could just control every aspect of my life, every person in it, I would be happy, safe, invincible. But true happiness, I now knew, came from the exact opposite. It came from letting go. It came from embracing the messy, unpredictable, beautiful chaos of life and love. It came from the courage to be vulnerable, to admit you don't have all the answers, to trust that someone else can take the lead. Don't get me wrong, the journey wasn't over. It would never be over. I still had my moments. There were days when the old Jocelyn, the ruthless general, would rear her head, wanting to micromanage a situation at work or impose a rigid schedule at home. The urge to control was a deeply ingrained addiction, and the temptation to relapse was always there, whispering in the back of my mind. But now, I had tools to fight it. I had the memory of Stella's tear-stained face. I had the sound of Asher calling himself stupid. And I had a supportive family who had learned to gently call me out. "Hey, Miss Vance," Miles would say with a teasing smile when he saw me getting tense over a misplaced set of car keys. "Let's just take a breath. It's not a hostile takeover. It's a set of keys." And I would stop, and I would breathe, and I would let it go. As I write this, I'm sitting in my home office. It's not really an office anymore. Sometime in the last few months, it has been repurposed. Asher's Lego creations now occupy one of the bookshelves, a vibrant, chaotic city built next to my business journals. Stella's guitar is propped in the corner, and a half-finished painting by Miles, the first he started in years, sits on an easel by the window, filling the room with the faint, hopeful scent of turpentine. It's a family study space now, a place for creation and collaboration, not just command and control. I can hear the sounds of my family in the other room. Miles is attempting to teach the kids how to make his famous lasagna, a task that, from the sounds of laughter and the occasional thump, is resulting in more flour on the floor than in the bowl. A year ago, the inefficiency of it all, the mess, the deviation from a perfect recipe, would have sent a spike of anxiety through me. I would have marched in there, taken over, and streamlined the process, sucking all the joy out of it in the name of getting it done right. Now, I just smile. I'm looking forward to joining them, to getting my hands dirty, to making a glorious, delicious mess together. My journey is far from over. Every day brings new challenges, new opportunities to choose connection over control, love over power. But I'm no longer afraid of those challenges. Instead, I embrace them, knowing that each one is a chance to grow, to love, to truly live. On my desk, the cracked glass on the old family photo has been replaced. But I didn't throw the old picture away. I keep it in a drawer. It's a reminder, a warning. Next to it sits a new photo, taken last week on that coastal beach. In it, we're all laughing, huddled together against the wind, our arms around each other, genuine, unforced smiles on our faces. The woman in the picture looks a little older, a few more lines around her eyes. She's not wearing a power suit. Her hair is a mess from the wind. She doesn't look like she has everything under control. She looks happy. She looks free. She looks like me. To anyone out there who recognizes themselves in my story, anyone who has sacrificed their personal life on the altar of success, who believes that control is the only path to security, I say this. It's not too late. The road isn't easy, but it's worth it. Let go of the need to have all the answers. Let go of the fear of being vulnerable. Embrace the beautiful mess of life and love. Trust me, the view from here is pretty spectacular. As for me, I'm closing this laptop. I'm going to join my family in the kitchen. There's a lasagna to be made and memories to be created. And really, isn't that what life is all about?